live today. Joining me in our book review is our good friends on Facebook, Roger Do, founder of QSearch, which is a social intelligence company. QSearch has been providing social intelligence to governments in their fight against COVID misinformation. He's now presently on his 12th day of lockdown at Sentosa Shangri-La, courtesy of the Singaporean government as he flew in from Taiwan into Singapore. We're also joined by my daughter's classmate and my uh, fellow data science team member, Sophia Guy, she's now based in Sydney, Australia. And finally, but not the least, here's the famous Jerry Tieng, founder of Titanium. His other businesses is Blitz Delivery, and his newest one is Frozen MNL. And so, without further ado, let me share my screen. And we start with the presentation. So this is our book review of the book Super Thinking, the big book of mental models by Gabriel Weinberg and Lauren McCann. So let me start off with some of the new things that might be novel to you. And this is from Philip Tetlock's book. He analyzed the ability to make decisions. So he compares people into two categories. Those are the foxes and the hedgehogs. No, hedgehogs have only a single basis as their dominant framework of thinking. So in terms of mental models, they have very few. Foxes, on the other hand, have multiple frameworks of thinking. So in terms of mental models, they have a lot of mental models. And what they found in what Philip Tetlock found was the more mental models you have, the higher the probability of success. So foxes are more successful than hedgehogs. The next also on the screen is the comparison between generalists and specialists. Um, right now in our complex world, the prevailing thought is that the generalist will outcompete the specialist. Okay, so that in a nutshell is what those two mental models are all about. And now we were talking about this, Sophia, right? When sometimes you were saying like, I'm in a data science team, but I'm not so confident enough. Well, I would say that you are now presently in your valley of despair. You have what we call the imposter syndrome. So this graph shows how confident a person speaks about a subject depending on experience and knowledge. Now, what they found was initially people that learn new things about a topic tend to overestimate their cognitive ability initially, and this is what they call Dunning-Kruger effect. That is this circle over here, the peak over here. I think, Jerry, in the vernacular, ito yung mga mayayabang pero ampaw. They know only a little, but they think they know a lot. Now compare with Sophia over here that has a lot of experience. And because of that experience, she knows that there's still a lot more to go. And so they are more humble and they're less confident about themselves, right? So that's the Dunning-Kruger effect versus imposter syndrome. Next mental model is the decision and utility values tree. Okay, so some of you may be familiar with how a decision tree works. A decision tree is the map of possible outcomes of a series of related choices. It allows the individual or organization to weigh possible actions against all the other options. And then you can see here, they assign probabilities and values. And so when you total them up, you will get an expected value if you were to choose one alt option as opposed to another option. And in theory, you would choose the one with the lowest expected value if you were paying out, and you would choose the higher value if it were a revenue decision. So are okay so far, guys? Roger, Jerry? Now, here's a bit busy slide because there's so much mental models that we have to share with you. The first is the golem effect. This is the golem effect. Essentially, when you have negative expectations of people, you will generally get the negative results. That's the golem effect. So, like in Chinese families, right? Our the older generation seldom gives us praise. They only look at all our mistakes. And psychologically, that's not good. Because if you only notice all the shortcomings of your kids, chances are your kids will keep on repeating them. So that's the golem effect. Next to it
And
is
then
the
it becomes a vicious cycle.
exactly, right? So
Yeah,
this
I
is
think there's an opposite model, right? Where
right.
you when you expect negative things, you're gonna get negative results. But the opposite is also could also be
Equally
true.
true. Yes,
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
is the Pygmalion effect. Here,
There
this
we
one.
go.
There you go. People are influenced by the expectations built upon them. There was a story around a class. So the teacher said, okay, this half of the school are expected to do well because of so and so. And guess what? That other half really did better just because of that Pygmalion effect. So it applies also to teams, right? The next is what we call the uh, lateral thinking. So sometimes if you're a very straight guy and you think through one objective and you follow all the rules, sometimes that may not work out the best for you. You may need to be thinking outside of the box, or in this case, it's called lateral thinking. So here in this graphic, you're supposed to go from point A to point B in but this other guy that exhibits lateral thinking went from point A to point B by going outside of the box. So remember that graphic as your mnemonics for lateral thinking. Next is the conjunction fallacy. Simply put, it's when you assume that specific conditions are more probable than a single general one. So in this case, if you have bank tellers that are who are not feminist and feminist over here, what is your sorry, this is the circle of all bank tellers that are female, and this is the circle of all feminists. So people would generally assume that there are more bank tellers that are feminists, where in fact you can see that this area here is smaller. So this is the conjunction fallacy. Finally, for the screen, we have also perception versus reality mental models. So perception is something that occurs exclusively inside your mind, while reality is that which exists completely outside of your mind and cannot be easily manipulated. However, there is a saying that perception can become a person's reality. And hence, you can see this picture. Both of them are going to be headed to the same reality, but it's their perception of what's happening that alters their reality.
Well, this is just like the current reality of COVID and the perception of COVID. There's a huge gap and is causing us a lot of problems.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Roger, for jumping in there. So next is the backfire effect. Yeah. The backfire effect is really a part of a larger psychological phenomenon called the confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is relatively better known. It is what we do as a human being. We tend to filter out things so that we only let in ideas that confirm to what we believe to be true. Everything that is not true, we drop it off. So that's the backfire effect. So what happens is, sometimes you have hardcore fans of a politician, let's not name names, and you find that no matter how much data or evidence you you present to this hardcore fan or loyalist, you can never sway their opinion. And this is where this is part of Roger's expertise. So they found out that the more data, the more evidence contrary to what the person believes is true, the more they will harden their position and it will cause a backfire. Right? Next is the Semmelweis reflex. So the story goes that Semmelweis was a doctor, and he noticed that the patients of doctors kept on dying at an unusually high rate. And he suggested washing hands. So when a particular hospital started washing their hands, the death rates of their patients started going down. Apparently, what was happening was these doctors were also examining cadavers. And without washing their hands, they were then carrying the germs back into the regular patients. But the problem for some of Wise is that at the time, the germ theory was not well known or well accepted. So he had to suffer a nervous breakdown and go inside a mental asylum and died before his contributions later on were acknowledged. And that's where we come up with the expression that progress happens one funeral at a time. It was when the old guard started dying off that the newer doctors started accepting or be open to the possibility that, hey, this new idea has merit. And finally, for this slide, we have the slide of this elephant. This is the learned helplessness slide. So the idea of the elephant, if you notice, this elephant has enough strength to pull out the stake. But he's not doing so because from an early age, they were trained, they were accustomed to being tied down. And so they never bother to break their yokes. And that's what's happening also in the current time. Like people now have learned helplessness and they just give up. No more hope. Here. Um, would you like fries with that? How many times have you encountered that McDonald statement?
Every time.
Every time. And that's what they call a social nudge. A nudge is a concept in behavioral economics which proposes positive reinforcement and indirect suggestions, subliminal suggestions, as ways to influence your behavior and decision making. Nudging is entirely different from education, legislation, or enforcement. For example, Roger, later on, you might talk about social nudging in relation to wearing masks in the US. No, not to take out thunder from your end. The next is the critical thinking. So this all started when Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. He meant it quite literally. So the very earliest origins of critical thinking lie in self-examination. Thomas Aquinas constantly tested his thinking by systematically anticipating, considering, and answering every criticism of his ideas. And in so doing, he inspired others to appreciate a kind of systematic cross-examination of the self. And this gave rise to the rational and objective thinking we now know as critical thinking. Finally, in this slide, in the book The Mind by Carol Dweck, they propose the two sets of mindset, the growth mindset and a fixed mindset. Let me... So essentially, what's different from here, and I think, Jerry, this applies to you. People with growth mindset, they look at crisis as an opportunity to do something better. So during the crisis, Jerry set up Blitz and Frozen MNL, which delivered frozen foods, right? So they
Yeah.
look at problems as opportunities to do better. And that's the special talent of people with growth mindset. And we're almost through. Um, Here is social norms versus market norms. Sometimes, like, let's say Jerry is a friend. Um, let's say he's also a neighbor. And then one day I have to, let's say, go abroad. So I will ask Jerry, pwede ba, can you take a look at the house and take care to feed my dog for me while I'm away? What would Jerry say? As part of social norm, okay lang yan. But Jerry is a high-priced lawyer. Let's say Jerry is a high-priced lawyer. If you were to bill for his time, you know, so the idea here is there are some instances where social norms take place, and there are some instances where market norms take place. So in an organization, especially NGOs, foundations, most of the people, volunteers there, are driven by social norms. No, so never make the mistake of switching from social norms to market norms. Like, oh, Jerry, volunteer here, I will pay you this much. The moment you cross that line, you can never go back to social norms. Now, one interesting anecdote here was they applied this to vandals. So there was this story, I think, Taylor, Jew. So the German kids were vandalizing his store every day. So what he used was social norm versus market norm. What he did was he called the kids and said, "Hey kids, I will pay you $1 a day to vandalize my store." So the kids were like initially hesitant, but they agreed. So they got paid. They vandalized the store. They got paid every day, every day. And then one day the guy said, I cannot pay you anymore. Can you still vandalize my store? Jerry, what do you think the kids will say?
Yeah, yeah, that's okay.
No more. We will not vandalize your store until you pay us. Oh,
Yeah.
so that's how they use the social norm versus market norms. Um, this one,
But
the
hang
other
on,
one,
why is he asking to vandalize his store?
psychology. So the other application here is, you notice the best basketball player, they all started out with the love of the game, right? And then they get into the
Mhm.
pro and they started to be paid for playing the game. What happens when they stop being paid
Or paid lower.
or they paid lower? They will refuse to play.
Yeah, they will not play their best.
Di ba? So
Right.
so that's the social versus market norms.
But
Yeah.
also think about this way: it's not always uh, direct. It's always not polaric, because if you think of startup have some market norm, and there's a huge social norm within a startup, because you're trying to get people to behave greatly above what you pay them, because you pay them very little, or it's
Yes.
all equity. So startup is a unique combination of social norm, huge amount. The cultural code, that's all social norm.
Mhm.
And market norm is very thin. So there's always a mixture of social norm and market norm. So even in your organization, you pay people to come to work, but there are certain behavior you want them to do, but you can't pay them to do, or
Ah,
you shouldn't. So that's where you really got to think of, okay, these models are very simple to understand, but it's never a pure model in real life.
exactly. And Jerry, going back to the example where you are a high-priced lawyer, I asked you to take a look at my house and feed my dog. Let's say you spend an hour a week to do that in total. You'd gladly do that for free. But then if I come back to you and say, Jerry, as a lawyer, can you write a will for me? It will just take you 5 minutes, but I expect it to be free. So then the market norms come in. And Jerry would likely say, but hey, that's my profession. I expect to get paid for that.
Right.
right? So
Right.
that's social and market norm. Now, the
No,
next one.
one second. But see, so if you and Jerry have a lawyer and non-lawyer interaction,
Uh-huh.
which one do you use? But between two lawyers, there's a professional code because they realize as a profession they can't survive using ambiguity. Lawyer have a professional code among them to govern, to tell them when is market norm appropriate and when is social norm appropriate, because they have to codify that behavior.
Right. Okay.
Like journalists also has a code too, among journalists for source, quotation, because your profession can't survive without explicit understanding
Of
of
that
what
code.
norm.
Right. Okay. So now we go to the bystander effect. How many of you have heard of the bystander effect? Roger. Okay. So it all started in New York when a lady by the name of Kitty Genovese got raped, attacked and raped, all the while screaming for, like, let's say a few hours, and none of the neighbors went down to help them, help her. And so social psychologists wanted to study that effect, and apparently they found out that you are less likely to be helped in situations where there are more people around than when you have only one other person around. So that's the bystander effect. The more bystanders there are, the less help you get. Next, we go to this other theory, the flypaper theory in military strategy. This is totally something new to me. So as you know, a flypaper, whatever lands on it sticks, right? So they use the flypaper theory as a sort of honeypot. So it's the idea where it is desirable to draw the enemy fire. So that's why they invaded Iraq. According to this U.S. Army General Ricardo Sanchez, it's better to have troops in Iraq so that the terrorist attacks the troops in Iraq rather than go all the way to America and attack its citizens. So that's the flypaper theory in military strategy. Next, this is also something new to me. It's Potemkin village. So in politics and economics, a Potemkin village is any construction whose sole purpose is to provide a false front. So
Like no startup?
like you embellish. If you're a startup, you embellish.
Fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it. So that's the Potemkin village concept. So the next one is the Occam's Razor. So it's a principle that states that unnecessarily complex models should not be preferred over the simpler ones. The other one is Joyce's law. No matter who you are, most of the smartest people already work for somebody else. So when you're hiring, the best ones are with another company. And then the graphic of global and local maximum is essentially a balance between exploitation and exploration. So let's say you're totally blind and you're randomly walking places and you want to be at the highest spot. So you reach a local maximum so that if you take any step forward, you go down. So you realize that, hey, I'm at the peak, right? So that's your local maximum. But if you never take additional risk, you will not find the global peak, which is actually higher. But for you to reach the global peak, you would have to go down a valley, right? So in business, sometimes you don't know whether to, okay, this market is already good enough. I'll stop at this market and I'll exploit this market. I won't go any further because to do so would entail additional cost for me. So that's the local and global maximum argument. And here, I just learned this today. The Hanlon's razor, which is opposite of Occam's razor. Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. Roger, can you help me out with the example?
Sure. You don't have to, for the covert response, you don't have to have a complex theory about how that the government is using the virus to kill off people. Like China is launching this virus across the world to harm the American economy. You just have to blame on simple stupidity. We're not good at epidemic anymore. You don't have to have a complex theory like Trump does. It can easily be explained by human stupidity.
Yeah. So either it was built in the lab and human stupidity allowed it to go out, or they did not learn their lessons from SARS, where they still kept live chickens and live wildlife together, where they allowed the viruses to then mix and then infect the general population. Hanlon's razor. Okay, next one is Hawthorne Effect. So this was done by a study by a group of efficiency experts at the lighting factory for, I think it was Western Electric or GE, General Electric, Hawthorne plant at Cicero. So they were amazed when they said, okay, let's examine the effect of lighting levels on productivity. So as they added more light, the productivity at that factory kept on increasing. So they came to the conclusion that, okay, lighting levels affect productivity positively until they did a control point. They told the factory floor that, hey, we're going to increase lighting levels a bit more. But actually, they did not do so. Guess what happened to productivity? It still went up. So they found out that it wasn't the lighting level. It was the fact that they were measuring performance that mattered. So Hawthorne Effect, simply, is business motto that we always say. You get the performance that you measure. That is Hawthorne's effect. On the other hand, you should also be aware of Goodhart's law. So when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So there in that chart, if you wanted to measure or pay people by the number of nails, they will give you a huge amount of nails, but very, very small ones. So if you then decide to change your metric and say, okay, I want it by the weight of the nails, they will give you a few giant ones. So what happens, in other words, is when we set one specific goal, people will tend to optimize for that objective, but it will be regardless of the consequences. So I think that's the end of my slides. Back to you, Roger.
Wilson, on the Goodhart law, so Donald Trump wanted to decrease COVID in the United States. Just slow down the testing.
Yeah.
That's exactly the same problem.
Yeah. No testing, then no COVID.
No virus, yeah.
And he announced
regardless of the consequences.
And he announced it.
So
Roger, your slides.
Yeah. So I was looking at how do we apply the mental model. You have it, Wilson?
Why don't you run it from your end?
Okay, let's see. Yeah, so I was thinking, okay, since we have these mental models, let's look at the way that how we can think about COVID using specific model.
Right. Hang on. Are you showing your slides yet?
I'm trying to pull up right now. Can you put? I didn't prepare to show the slide. I thought you were going to do.
Oh, okay. I'll play it from my end.
Yeah. So how do we think about, how do we apply these models to think about stuff in our world? So I took COVID as an example. One of the things the book talks about is the Pareto principle, where a small amount of activity will have large impact. So if you look at the Pareto, 20% of the input account for 80% of the output. This is very well known in business. So let's use this principle to think about COVID responses. Wilson, can you advance the slide?
Yep.
So if you look at this, we can use mask, we can use contact tracing, we can use sheltering in place, community quarantine, border closure, and medical intervention. Each one of these actions have their own outcome. and some action have much higher outcome than others. So medical intervention is really the last resort, because after medical intervention is incineration. You're burning the body. So that's not a Pareto choice, because it almost has one-to-one correspondence, because one doctor treats one patient terminally ill.
Mhm.
So you're not even preventing. You're deciding between morgue or medical care long term.
I
Border
was.
closure, community quarantine both have cost.
Mhm.
Border closure effectively means economic pausing the economy. Community quarantine, shelter in place, contact tracing, and mask. Now we can get into a Pareto choice. Mask probably gave us the largest, like if everybody wore mask, it probably gave us the highest Pareto outcome.
Mhm.
Relatively low cost, fairly easy to enforce if we have a social norm about wearing masks.
Right.
So we can think about choices in real life using Pareto. Which one gives us the best leverage?
I was thinking the other way, Roger.
Okay.
Like Pareto principle, 20% accounts for 80% of your instances. So like in terms of infection, 20% of the population or 20% of the cases causes 80% of the spread. So
Yeah.
if that works, if Pareto principle holds, then if a country can identify those 20% before they start infecting, you would have effectively eliminated 80% of the new cases
Sure, but to
if
do
you
that,
can identify those super spreaders.
yeah, but to do the super spreader, you have to have a huge amount. That will only possible in a surveillance state where you know who are the high contact. But the mask can be done indiscriminately. You need zero data to do mask, to make everyone wear a mask. That's a completely dataless solution.
All right.
Everybody wear a mask. And
Yeah. Yeah.
community quarantine is also a dataless solution.
Non-pharma, they call it non-pharmacological interventions.
Yeah. So border closure is a dataless solution.
Mm-hmm.
But contact tracing is a huge data effort. And so what we want to think about is, what can we do right away? Because you got to understand, COVID virus is a natural phenomenon. The pandemic is a human created situation. If everybody followed the recommended medical guideline, we can win against COVID without any medical breakthrough.
So in essence, what you're saying, if I can paraphrase it, is that if everybody maintains social distancing, wears the mask, they would in effect reduce the reproductive ratio to below 1.
Yeah, way below 1.
Way below 1. Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing with AIDS virus. AIDS virus is a phenomenon, but with the proper behavior change, we don't need a vaccine for AIDS, because that's a behaviorally transmitted disease.
And so this is your next slide.
Yeah. So framing. So right now, people are, because the preconception, people's image of themselves, they frame wearing medical mask as a political choice. But let's reframe it. Let's go to the next slide. What if we reframe wearing mask as a defeat state surveillance? It's all about framing. A lot of American people have a preconceived frame that government ordering me to wear a mask is fascism. So I'm not going to wear a mask. So their ideological frame is overriding medical frame, survival frame. So let's just reframe it. So there's different ways to reframe this problem. It's not, we're defeating state surveillance, which, a lot of Muslims, I don't know how they feel, because America had this legal ban against burqa in public. Now everybody's wearing masks. It's a really strange frame. It really is a strange frame.
Okay.
So this is where, to be a problem solver, both for our own life and for the people, a problem around us, we got to reframe. We can reframe the problem, because reframing, to come up with a reframing is it has zero cost.
Correct.
Putting it into effect costs a little bit more, but if we can reframe problem, we can solve a lot of real difficult challenges without significant legal or monetary resource.
So what you're saying now is most of the U.S. states, they're going about it the wrong way by mandating the use of face masks.
Yeah.
So you see in the news channels that the citizens there are very upset, to put it lightly, about being forced to wear the mask. However, like what you're saying is, if you're framing it into another, if you're looking at it from another angle, that may be used to sway populations to adopting the desired behavior.
Sure. What if I sell a brand of face mask that has pattern on it, and I claim that this pattern will screw up facial recognition software? How well would that sell? See, I can accomplish the purpose
smart.
of masking
Yeah.
without
Yeah,
anything
and
else. I say, this will screw up Amazon's facial recognition.
And remember, guys, you heard that idea first at Manila Bulletin's Tech News section.
Yeah, so let's reframe it. So let's look at the pattern. So when we try to solve a problem, we're trying to solve where most people don't have patterns, so they use experience. Whereas if there's an existing pattern we can use efficiently and quickly, we can make breakthroughs. So if you look at contact tracing like Nova is trying to remap the entire society into this graph. This graph represents relationship. The blue node, the red node are the super spreader. So this is what Wilson was talking about. But to do this, you have to have a lot of data. This is data heavy. But this is also very interesting because advance to next slide. This is Saddam Hussein, dictator of Iraq. When US invaded Iraq, they couldn't find him. They tried radio intercept, satellite intercept, drones. They even have like $1 million bounty.
Yeah.
What solved it was 2 American army sergeants mapping out Saddam Hussein's entire family tree. They found only one person has no conflict with other part of the family. So that's the only person Saddam could possibly trust. They observed him for 3 days, and on the 3rd day, they dragged Saddam Hussein out of his spider hole.
Yeah,
surveillance.
I think that was the driver, if memory serves me right.
It was a distant uncle or cousin or something.
Okay.
So this is how the mental model solve a real world problem. How do you find one guy in Iraq? So
that's the one to be found.
That's the one to be found. There's only one person in the entire 270 family cluster. Only one person that has no contact with everybody else. Like, he doesn't take side. So that's the only one Saddam could have possibly trusted. So this is how mental model help us solve real world problem. And in the COVID, we need all different mental model. If you look at this is the historical pandemic wave. Right now we're in wave 1. We're showing wave 1. So this is interesting because it shows that there's regularity to the pattern. When you advance to the next graph, this is the diffusion of innovation. The lower map, the bump is how innovation is distributed. As innovation gets distributed, the total market share become higher. So
that's your yellow line.
Yeah, the yellow line. So imagine this. What if we're distributing innovation in behavior modification? What if each one of the 3 waves on the upper left side are different innovation, different behavior being populated through? So each behavior innovation have different impact. So wave 1, it may be face masks. Second, it may be public sanitization, like the misting that some city are doing.
Yep.
Drone aerial spreading of using aerial spreading of disinfectant, social distancing. So what if we can engineer these innovation to make sure we don't have a 2nd or 3rd wave? That's what we're thinking about. Taiwan shut down the border very early on. So we have basically no community infection. So these are the things we got to think about: the Pareto effect, the choices we make, what model we think about, and how do you reframe something that, because the reframing is the lowest cost to behavior change.
Yeah, and
Legislation, monetary are hugely expensive. Medical intervention, like why are we manufacturing a global vaccine? Because the government don't know how to change people's behavior. Medical is the most expensive payment for the lack of competent governance.
So interesting idea. So what you're proposing is behavioral modification as another tool in the government's arsenal to fight COVID.
I will argue behavior modification is the ultimate tool to fight COVID, but it's not what's in the government's power to enact it.
Okay, got it. Jerry and Sophia, any notes or insights or comments you'd like to share?
Excuse me. I'd like to personally share my experiences selling frozen goods in very layman's terms. As you well know, when we went into a lockdown, people's mobility were severely restricted, so that it gave us an opportunity to create a new service to deliver to people's homes.
Growth
Now,
mindset.
That's right, right? And I would think that given the restrictions, people would now aggressively and quickly adapt to all the new digital transformation services, tools that are available in the market, but we're having difficulty in gaining traction pre-COVID, right? For example, digital cash payments, eliminating cash on delivery, so on and so forth, and also changing the way how people conduct their business. But based on the mental models you showed, it does reaffirm that certain people cling on to their beliefs, to their ways of thinking, despite contradicting evidence. For example, people still want to pay COD, even though we warn them that it may be a vector for COVID transmission. Of course, medically, scientifically, it may not be, but they do so nevertheless because it is what is convenient for them. They go, come deliver to me, I'll pay you COD. I don't want to order online, I want to chat. If you don't do that, I'm going to order somewhere else. Okay.
And so you're forced. I saw your post the other time.
Yes.
You initially stopped COD because you didn't want to be a vector.
Without COD, yeah. But I have to capitulate. I have to adapt. Otherwise, I'm losing out on a certain segment, right?
But one could argue that if you give in to them, pretty soon the herd will be culled. Those that insist on COD will get infected, they will die, and they will drop out of your customer list.
And fortunately or
So
unfortunately,
sad to say,
most of these are of the older generation.
Exactly, yeah.
I think they find it a struggle to, load their wallets, set up their credit cards, so on and so forth. They'll just want to make an order and be done with it.
So that's why I invited Sophia, and I begged her to come on board so we can also get a millennial's point of view. So what do you think about mental models, Sophia?
Yeah, so I joined this I didn't know it was gonna be live, but so I joined this talk wanting to know more about the book. So we're all of these mental models part of the book.
Yes.
Like it was discussed in the book.
But
Yeah, so
we added some of the stories behind them, like the bystander effect. They didn't discuss the Kitty Genovese case, but we knew about it from our other lessons learned. But go ahead.
yeah, that's pretty cool. So one of the things that one of the mental models that was mentioned was about having those very specific targets or goals that it becomes so narrow that people laser focus on that. And I think this is in my case. I am currently in Sydney. I'm a senior software engineer in Atlassian. So I
Mhm.
really appreciate how we are, you know, how we sort of navigate around that. So it's not just being laser focused on the target, but also having the culture around to sort of countermeasure to be a counter to that.
Mhm. Good
So
Heart's
in our
Law.
case, yeah. So in our case, it's about thinking about the customer and not just about feature delivery. It's not just about delivering as many features as you can just for the sake of it because that's what's specified in your target or your OKR. But it's
Mm.
also about, always thinking about the customer.
So for the benefit of our listeners right now, OKR stands for
Objective key
key
results.
results. Yes, and
Yeah, yeah.
Jerry manages a team of developers. So Jerry has the point of view of the manager. Right. So Jerry, how do you measure productivity of your engineers?
It's very hard because I feel that software engineering is a creative process. It's not a task or procedure. Some might code really quickly, some might code, take a really long time. I think overall, I would not measure them directly, but rather to involve them in the business goals of the company. So as long as business goals are met, then I would make that assumption that they have done their job. So similar to working from home, obviously, there's a need from HR to transition from industrial age thinking of measuring productivity in terms of paying people based on attendance to
Mhm.
simply paying based on output. So
Output.
same, so
Yeah.
yeah, so same work from home engineers, creatives. It's really just output, and output does not have to be always consistent like a factory. You produce 10,000 pieces every hour, every day. You have high points, you have low points. As long as overall the goals are met, then we're good. And I think that this COVID allows us to rethink what life is all about. I mean, are we supposedly, to have constant output every day because you're being paid your daily or monthly wage, or
Mhm.
do you measure it by, waves and so I think for me, we're done with paying people by time as is the norm in the
Uh-huh.
Philippines. In fact, for people, it's work from home till the end of the year. And then we are
Maybe
also
even
forever. Yeah.
farther,
So
farther
from
than.
work from home will now become work from anywhere because I now advise my people to go look for sidelines for secondary sources of income. I say, go back home to your provinces, buy agricultural land, plant your pechay and your, carrots and whatnot, become an online farm to table e-commerce sellers. I'll deliver for you in Metro Manila. So
Yeah.
you work from anywhere, you do software job, you don't have to do your 8 hours. You find another thing that inspires you more, motivates you better, and
Mhm.
it's really just about a livelihood, a new
Yeah.
way of thinking, we are living. Yeah.
Roger, let me get back to you. Was there any part of the book that particularly resonated with you?
I deal with mental model all the time. I was a philosophy major, so this is what we think about.
I
The
didn't know
book
that
is,
about you, Roger.
yeah, UC Berkeley Philosophy of Science.
Okay.
Yeah. So the book is very good, but it's very shallow. It just touched on a few concepts, but this is a great survey book for college kid, like because if you go to grad school, you're basically learning 6 mental model in your specialty. That's it. So this book actually gives you a survey of what's possible. What's really the book is really good. I like the trying to link everything up. It's shallow, so it doesn't really satisfy me. But it's
So
really
breadth,
good.
it has the breadth, but it's not the depth of the
Yeah, it's
reading.
no concept they talked about I have not heard or thought about. But it's nice to see everything in one place. It's a good survey book. Um, some of the examples are not correctly used. So the danger of choosing the wrong mental model is very real. Like for Switzerland, they chose to believe that the herd immunity model prevalent in other epidemics.
Sweden. Sweden
Sweden,
or
yeah,
Sweden, not Switzerland.
yeah. So the
Oh yeah,
head
Sweden. Yes.
science guy chose the herd model, which worked in some disease, But we just like today we read some doctor don't believe there's going to be any residual immunity from COVID. Like your body forgets in 2 or 3 months.
Oh no.
So Sweden basically sacrificed the entire population on the wrong mental model because they assume there must be herd immunity. When the latest research showed your immune response for COVID disappear after 2 months. So there's no herd immunity.
So for laymen, what you're saying now is the recent news report are saying that if you got COVID, you recovered. After 3 months or 4 months, you can still
eligible.
you can still get infected again.
Yeah. And
no.
Yeah, so Sweden chose this mental model to deal with the epidemic without any evidence that COVID will confer lasting immunity, like other diseases confer lasting immunity. COVID and other coronavirus doesn't. So everything Sweden has suffered through is because their cultural predisposition, the individual person chose the wrong mental model. He chose this model, and the cultural, economic, unique experience of Sweden supported this choice. So I was telling Wilson, COVID is a natural virus. The pandemic is a human-made condition.
Yeah. So thankfully, Taiwan government was also used data to fight COVID. I understand that they're...
yeah, we did. But the choice to cut off the border is because Taiwan don't trust China.
Because of the prior SARS experience before. And they learned their lesson.
Yeah. And Vietnam did not choose to believe in China, and they just closed off the border right away. Two most successful countries. Like, you can make these Pareto choices without data.
Yeah. But then, there's another concept that we did not discuss. It's called the MRI, the most respectful interpretation. Mm-hmm. So for the Philippine concept, remember that initially the data was sparse and coming in unverified. So initially when the disease struck, there was not really a huge amount of study. So the leaders at that time did not have enough data to form a proper plan or strategy, right? It just so happens like in Taiwan made the correct call.
Based on previous, it's different culture, and Philippines has very different relationship with China than Taiwan does. Taiwan and China exist in a very adversarial position. Mm-hmm. That's why Taiwan's mental outlook is shaped by that. So they can make a hard political call without any data because they're mentally and politically they support. Just like if South Korea want to call for emergency military assembly of its citizens, people will not object because their condition was their relationship to the North Korea to think that way. So every country have different perspective, and the pandemic can spread throughout the world. You can look at it as a epidemic issue, or you can look at it as an international relationship. You can use the spread of COVID as a measurement of the nature of relationship between countries. Why not?
The global migration pattern.
No, the global power imbalance, because so Taiwan and China has different political balance. So that's why the spread is different.
Yeah.
Because we use travel mobility as a measurement of cooperation, interdependency. So you can measure epidemic, the COVID spread as a power influence map, not as a viral map. Different model.
Sophia, are you familiar with the power distance law?
No, what is that?
Roger, power distance law.
I probably know about the name. I probably know it's the power law.
Yeah. So there are cultures where they hold authority in higher regards than others. So you have cases where a Korean plane was supposedly crashed, even though the co-pilot knew that the major pilot did something wrong. because of the power distance in the culture, the junior co-pilot did not dare correct his
Yeah.
senior. So things that, you know, so interesting. I hope you guys had fun and learned a lot. For us, Roger and me, we discussed these books with the prime purpose of cementing the mental models into our minds, and we just said, let's open it up and share it with other people. Jerry, any parting words before we close the live stream?
This is beautiful. I'm gonna apply the learnings that I have in real life, and put it in compartments and know how to react better.
Ooh, uh, how about you, Sophia?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. This was very educational, like really good that you guys are sharing this.
Yeah. So have you decided whether or not to go ahead and buy the book?
Yeah, probably do. I mean, I got budget. I have some training budget to spend.
Right. Okay.
I already
And
brought the book.
Thank you.
and we're joined by Johnson Regalado. Unfortunately, we're about to sign off. So thank you for joining, Johnson. Hey guys, till the next
Thank
time. Bye